Uyghur elinin oğlu sen, Uyghur üçün can bergen, milletçe başını sungan, atalgan kulluk insan. Satmadın şerefimni, baylık üçün cinini, süydün sen milletimni, Uyghur elinin oğlu. Dosta hizmetini kılar, dostlar için kan töker. Yerdem kirek bolsa, oktek uçar yinınla. Sen vatanın kıymeti, gece gündüz davaga. Uygurumның ümidi, halkımның bir palvanı. O alemde kalmadı, İnsan bilmegen seni, Okmay çıktın düşmenni, Uygur elinin batırı.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome to a very special episode of Talkies Turkestan. Today I have with me Miss Emma Reilly. As you know, we had her on exactly around this time last year, November 2nd, 2020. Unfortunately, I'm still quite surprised, as many others, why this isn't on every single headline around the world. Basically, in short, Reilly had alerted her bosses at the UN, she herself being a UN human rights lawyer, of the UN giving the names of Chinese dissidents to the CCP, and in turn, the CCP would put pressure on the family members of those about to give testimony at the various meetings held. And she now, being a whistleblower, has been fired from the UN, and we've got her on today to basically tell us what's been going on in the last year since we last talked. So welcome to our show, Emma. Thank you for giving your time. What's been happening since we last spoke, basically in summary of the last year?
Thank you for having me. Well, basically, in terms of the UN handing names to China, nothing has changed. The UN still refuses to even contemplate the idea of investigating that, of stopping. In court, the UN still says that it continues to hand names to China. What has happened is that basically, as I said, in terms of my reports actually leading to any change, unfortunately, that didn't happen. The UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nadal Nashif, I actually posted our conversation online. She called me and threatened me in June of this year, to basically stop speaking out about it. She was very clear that she did not care whether or not names are still handed over. She did not care that she had been handed one of about 7 different versions of events. She did not care that what she was saying to me was the opposite of the UN's core position. She just wanted me to stop speaking out because, in the UN's view, the UN has a right to protect its reputation and has a right to lie to the press, to lie to the dissidents whose names it's handed over. And the only concern of the UN has been effectively to shut me up. And in order to achieve that, they trumped up an investigation where I'm charged only with blowing the whistle. I'm charged with telling the truth in public because the UN feels that the truth of its own policies is bad for its reputation. I would suggest to the UN that the way of dealing with that would be to change the policy and not to fire the whistleblower.
So just a quick summary of how deep it is. There's a timeline of events. So from 2006, the UN has been handing names to China, and that's continued pretty much to this day. Emma started, she got caught wind of this in 2013, reported it to the UN, and she's continued to do so. You were given some sort of whistleblower status, but that was taken away from you?
Yeah, that was completely illegal. In order to cover this up, the UN has gone to quite extraordinary lengths. My court cases were heard in 2019. And the judge who heard my cases, it was pretty clear to everyone in the courtroom that I had won. He had written his judgments already. He was ready to publish his judgments. And the UN knew what those judgments said. So one day he went into work and the UN told him not to come to work the next day. It's Judge Rowan Downing, a very respected Australian judge, used to be in the Cambodian War Crimes Tribunal, someone with an enormous amount of judicial experience. There was no allegation that he had done anything wrong at all. The UN just did not want those judgments published because those judgments were going to reveal that the UN's court position under oath is that it continues to hand names to China. And the UN doesn't want to know people, or doesn't want people to know that it's doing that. So they fired a judge. Then in July 2020, I was finally recognized as whistleblower. And in the UN system, it's meant to be an independent system. So only ethics officers can recognize whistleblowers. And you can only get recognized as whistleblower if the administration is retaliating against you. So obviously the administration doesn't have the right to determine whether or not you're a whistleblower because they're the ones that are retaliating. So I was found to be a whistleblower in July 2020. Under the UN rules, that meant that an investigation had to start immediately. It was meant to take a maximum of 120 days. The UN decided to inform me, it was in June of this year, so a year later, not done the investigation, not looked into whether names are still being handed to China, not looked into why people started handing names to China. The UN decided that I'm not a whistleblower. They have absolutely no authority to do that. On the same day, pretty much, they closed down an audit. There was meant to be an audit about UN whistleblower policies. Are these working? Are people being protected when they report something's in the public interest? They found out that the auditors had spoken to me and intended to use my case to show that the UN has no whistleblower protection, and so they stopped the audit. The UN has had one meeting on the situation in East Turkestan in the entire time that it's been going on. That meeting was held on the 12th of May of this year, and I had signed up to participate remotely. 5 minutes into the meeting, there's a knock on my door, and it's the Swiss police. The UN have sent armed police to my home to stop me from speaking, to stop me from revealing this policy. Again, I've not been fired for lying. I've been fired for the act of speaking. I can't hear you.
I just want to show everyone the actual ramifications of what actually happens. And this is Emma's response into her charges. What actually happened was, so this is a very good example that you showed in your response. You said that on the 1st of June 2006, sons of Miss Rabia Kadir, which is considered someone who is considered the leader or the mother of the Uyghurs, whose intention was to speak at the council, had been disclosed to China on every occasion that she attended. Her sons were beaten in front of their children as well as their sister, and so her family members, tortured and jailed and all these things. So there are real ramifications or real repercussions for what the UN has been doing for giving these names. It's not just they're giving names and everyone's safe and sound. It stops Uyghurs and other dissidents from speaking out, essentially.
That's what it's designed to do. China doesn't want these people speaking, and the UN is helping them to have them not speaking. And it's not just through handing over their names in advance. I mean, that's the worst end of it, because the only purpose for which China is going to use those names is to intimidate people. There's no good reason to be handing them over. And the situation, that example of Rabia Kadir, it's public in her case because she's such a high-profile figure and she suffered so much personal tragedy as a result of her advocacy. But those same circumstances have been described to me by other people whose names were handed over. Now, their names aren't in the public domain, and I'm not going to put them there. I'm not going to expose anyone to risk, but I have given them to the Secretary General. I have also given him the name of someone whose name was handed to China. The person was never informed. He later moved back to East Turkestan, and he died in a concentration camp. Now, the UN keeps saying publicly that they took some kind of protective measures, but they admitted in Le Monde yesterday, and that was the newspaper article basically that got me fired, when people started to finally pay attention, and Le Monde did a great job of investigative journalism. They looked at the evidence, they knew I was telling the truth. When the UN was challenged with the truth, it said they have no idea whose names have been handed over. It says that names are handed over orally sometimes, so they don't know whether it's happening still or not. So how exactly are they claiming in public that nobody has been harmed? Because I have given them precise examples of people who have been harmed. When people receive phone calls from their families saying, do not go to the Human Rights Council, that could be linked to the fact that they know they're going to the Human Rights Council because the UN has told them that. So it is ridiculous for the UN to continue to just lie and lie and lie in public. We can see the lies. I made a list of the lies on a website because I was so sick of having to explain to everyone that they're just telling whatever lie they think will save their reputation this time. The reality is no senior manager at the UN cares. Antonio Guterres wants his legacy to be climate change. In order for that to happen, he feels he needs China on board, and it's like they get a free genocide so that Antonio Guterres can have a pact that we know China will not abide by because they do not abide by international law. So why are they suddenly going to abide by a voluntary commitment? Closing a few power stations does not get you a free genocide. That is not how international law works. That is not how the UN Charter works. And Antonio Guterres should resign.
So when you tweet out, for example, so far to shut me up, the UN has defamed me in a press release, fired a judge to stop him ruling in my favor, sent Swiss police to invade my home, shut down order of UN whistleblower policy, ignore official recommendations for my protection, and fired me. It won't work. What do you mean it won't work? So is there more to come? Are you going to fight this? What's going to happen?
Yeah. The great thing about finally being, essentially, it was always inevitable that I would be fired. I am not the victim here. The victims are the people whose names were handed over. And the victims are the people, their family members. I don't know why the UN assumes that that my pay and benefits was enough, that I would somehow stop caring about being, about the UN being complicit in genocide because, they happen to pay me a large salary. There isn't an amount of money on earth that I could be paid to be complicit in a genocide. And because they don't understand that, they kept creating all of these bureaucratic processes and hoops for me to jump through, presuming that I thought that I wouldn't be fired. I actually was pretty certain I would be fired right from the outset. The advantage of being fired is that there are rules that apply to UN staff members that, for example, this time I'm on your show and I'm able to use the word East Turkestan. Last time I wasn't. I had to sort of not refer to it in any way. Those rules include what documents I can make public. I can only waive my own confidentiality. So I can't, for example, publish documents from the Chinese government. And the thing about being fired is that I can now start to reveal some of the other aspects of this. My private communications with Antonio Guterres, where he talks about absolutely knowing that I am a whistleblower, knowing that I am telling the truth, and saying it's very, very difficult to protect me, and he's going to have to check with the people in charge. I'm sorry, who's in charge of the UN? Who exactly are the people that Antonio Guterres is checking with as to whether or not he can protect me? And, it is a little strange, the timing of my firing on the day that sort of he's announcing these wonderful accords between the US and China on climate change. I suspect I'm part of the deal. But the advantage of being fired essentially is that I can talk more openly about broader corruption within the UN. I can talk more broadly about the ways in which, for example, the High Commissioner for Human Rights has agreed with China that she will never meet anyone who is advocating on Tibet, on Uyghur issues, or on Taiwan. That is a long-standing agreement that dates back to the time that Mary Robinson was High Commissioner, and I do have the documents. I can talk about things like China basically stealing some OHCHR computers and documents at Beijing airport in order to find out exactly what was going on. There's a sort of infiltration in a sense that is seen as no senior manager in OHCHR engages with anyone who's working on China because they feel that there's too much political ramification if they do so. So anyone who's advocating for China with what is meant to be a neutral human rights body of the UN is basically sent to the most junior staff member possible. They are not listened to. They do not get a hearing. The fiction that there has been any effort to actually go to Xinjiang is ridiculous. There have been a couple of letters exchanged where there's a sort of formal request and a formal, oh yes, of course you can come, but under these conditions, and then a sort of formal request again. The idea that the UN Human Rights Office has been expending efforts in this direction is false. It's very concerning to me that people continue to push for that as the sort of main solution that people want to see, is that the High Commissioner should have access. The High Commissioner, when she was president of Chile, was responsible for the Belt and Road in South America. She has always refused to meet with me. She has done nothing to stop this policy. Her lawyers defend this policy in court. She is perhaps not the best placed person to actually advocate for human rights of Uyghurs.
Now, the last time we spoke, it didn't seem that you got a lot of support, or at least the support wasn't public. Are you getting any support or backing? Because obviously what's happened here is a complete injustice, not just to you, but the system and principles in which the United Nations stands on. I mean, that's just been ruined.
The short answer is no. Member states have this idea that it's very, very important that the Human Rights Office be independent. I don't disagree with that as long as the person running it believes in human rights. That is not the current situation. So we have a politician that doesn't actually really know anything about human rights. I mean, to the extent that it was quite amusing when she joined, when you're writing briefing notes for senior UN officials, you usually do sort of bullet points. She asked that we literally write it in the version I, blah, blah, blah. So literally sentences that she just read out. No thinking required. And there's that kind of idea that, that we need to have independence. Independence in terms of priorities, in terms of programming, sure. Independence in terms of retaliating against staff members who dare to report wrongdoing. The people who covered up child sex abuse in the Central African Republic are still in post. The only people who left were the whistleblowers who reported it. They were fired. The people who thought it was a great idea to cover up the rape of children remain at the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Similarly, everyone who handed names over to China without question has been promoted, every single person. I've been fired. And the fact that I was fired the day that I appeared in a major newspaper is a strong message to discourage anyone else from ever speaking up. It's amazing to me that there isn't more internal support, but the member states who are paying for this, I mean, the UN has spent 3 million at least on shutting me up. The woman who threatened me that I must absolutely be quiet on the pain of losing my salary and benefits, she earns, I think it's about $30,000 a month tax-free.
Wow. And
she couldn't even be bothered to check when I sent her the evidence after that phone call and said, you have been lied to. Here is the evidence that you have been lied to. Maybe do an investigation. Maybe look into this. Maybe stop this happening. And nothing. And I told her, if you claim in public that this is stopped, change your court position. Your court position is it continues. And the UN has never changed its court position because it does continue.
Well, that sort of leads me to my next question. Any regrets? I mean, what would you say to those who are or were in your position who are thinking of becoming a whistleblower within the confines of the UN? Because one would think no one is going to come forward, especially not after what they've seen you go through.
That's true. An Assistant Secretary General, which is the fourth highest post in the UN, and two of the posts above him are individuals. There's the Secretary General, the Deputy Secretary General, those are people. Then there's a sort of layer of Under Secretary Generals and a layer of Assistant Secretary Generals. An Assistant Secretary General told me that he knows that one of his staff members is raping children, and he is not reporting it because he's seen how I've been treated. I am aware of 3 other such cases. I tried to get the information. I tried to get enough details to be able to report it myself, to be able to try to get the investigation process started, but I couldn't get them. There are staff members who have been sexually assaulted by colleagues who are not reporting it because they know that all the UN knows how to do is to attack the whistleblower, and their reputations will be ruined, their careers will be ruined, so they suffer in silence. This system is broken, and member states need to step up and change it. It's deeply concerning because names aren't just handed over for the Human Rights Council. That's just the one where I have most proof. Names are also handed over when China is before any other mechanism. So when it's before treaty bodies. So even there, I mean, for those, the experts on the treaty bodies meet people outside UN premises because it can be so dangerous for China to know that they're speaking. And beside that, you have the unelected, unaccountable civil servants just passing over their names. And they're never warned, they're never told this has happened. They aren't being told how many times it has happened. There's no system of accountability for the people that did this. And I mean, it's the guy who ordered it, Eric Tisternay, he is Le Monde's anonymous source. And he admits in that paper that names are still given orally. Now, that is the opposite of what the UN's been saying publicly for years, but he's the man who ordered it. All the UN has ever done in 8.5 years of me reporting this is ask him. So I would say my regret is that I didn't just gather the evidence right at the start, resign, and go public. But the problem is that had I done that, I wouldn't have realized that the UN was lying when they said it stopped. It's only by being inside the system and being able to see some of China's communications where they know exactly who's coming that I'm able to show that this does continue. Either it continues or China doesn't care about Tibetans except for the very sessions where Tibetans are coming. And
that's why I'm shocked because you're not just a whistleblower of some small company, some Me Too movement or something. It's like this is a place where everyone goes to talk about the plights of all people. And I'm wondering, does this happen also with? I don't know if you've heard of other governments, or is this just China? That's been just China.
Just China. Which does raise the question, what exactly has China been giving the person that does this in return? Why? Because when Turkey asked, Turkey did not get the names. Other countries asked, other countries did not get the names. Exceptions is uniquely applied to China. I've spoken to people who used to do my role before me. Nobody is aware of it ever happening for any other country. The UN's position is that it's a sort of required thing. The position in court is that this is somehow required, that there's an obligation on the part of the UN to hand over the names. But yet it's never published anywhere. So, they can't have it both ways. And the thing I don't want to happen, and the thing that I'm always scared about when I talk publicly about this, I don't want to do China's job for it. The aim of Beijing in this case is to stop Uyghurs and others from speaking out in the forum that is available. It's the main forum that discusses human rights in the world. It is vitally important that their voices are heard. So what I've been sort of advising people to do is to think, is there someone else who can read a statement? Because it's largely theatre. Is there someone else who can read that statement for you? Is there a way that you can participate by video statement? So you video it and send it in, and you can change the name on that at the last minute because you don't need accreditation to enter the physical building. So you can pretend it's from someone else, send in the video statement, play it with a new name, and that way the length of time for which China would have to act would be very, very short. And also for people who are really at risk but aren't planning to sort of speak publicly within the meetings, UN staff can get you in as a visitor. Do you know any UN staff members that can do that for you? Can you contact someone and see if they'd be willing to kind of have you access to the building as a visitor so that you can get to the meeting you want to go to, but without the Chinese government being informed in advance? And I mean, my plea is really that member states investigate. There needs to be investigation of this. My being fired just shows the extent to which the UN will go to cover it up. I was very, very careful to never break any other UN rule because I was very clear that if I was being fired, they had to fire me for blowing the whistle. I've been fired for telling the truth. That isn't something that should be able to happen, but it is something that should show the member states that I am telling the truth. If the UN had been able to charge me with lying, they would have done it. They didn't. Member states need to investigate this now. I have been saying for over a year, as you said, that this is an ongoing practice. All evidence points that way, and I'm not charged with lying. The only reason for that is the UN knows I'm telling the truth.
I guess those that say or criticize our channel or other Uyghur organizations saying that there is no genocide going on, that everyone's happy and living happily, well, here's the proof. What if there is nothing going on? Why is China going to these lengths to silence Uyghurs? If there's no truth to it, going to the length where they put pressure on the UN to eventually get you fired. I'm asking those shills right now. If we're liars, one, you don't let anybody in. You don't give the UN unfettered access. And that's a question I want to ask you now. Because essentially, it was when you say things like the UN is run by the US or the UN is run by China in this instance, people think conspiracy theory. Now, we've been asking China to let the UN in to give unfettered access. What is that going to look like if unfettered access were to be given? Because if the UN is in China's, book, so to speak.
I mean, there have been some special procedures that visited China in the past. And the way that, the special procedures are kind of independent experts. So what would usually happen for such a visit is that, in this case, it would probably be staff members. But basically, the UN develops its own internal kind of idea of where it wants to go. So, I mean, the visit I'm thinking of particular is the Special Rapporteur Against Torture. When he visited China, he gathered information from NGOs about kind of where the prisons with the most torture, where are the people who are accused of terrorism being held, nature, he was going to be visiting those places, try to identify individuals with whom you want to meet. The issue is, of course, that a lot of times people find themselves being followed around. So, I mean, when he went to China, he reported that people were following him everywhere. There were men with briefcases all over the place. His access was impeded on the ground. He kept going because he thought it was important to at least try to do the report. And it was the first and last time, I believe, that a Special Rapporteur on Torture managed to get into China. But there are modalities for how these visits are done. It's about kind of collecting the information. So, I mean, that part of it in terms of the UN being able to design a decent visit and identify which parts would be important, that part wouldn't be the issue. But the issue would, of course, be that there's never been an unimpeded visit of a Special Rapporteur to China. So the idea that somehow this would work, there are other ways of gathering information. I think the Uyghur Tribunal has more than demonstrated that, and I'm very much looking forward to their judgment. But the UN could gather a lot of that information. Now, there has been some of that happening. There has been some information gathering within the Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights. That's not confidential information. Now, the willingness of the current sort of managers within OHHR to actually publish that or to actually take up that issue is very limited indeed. There is no appetite to discuss China. If you look, you will find that the High Commissioner has not made a single comment on the situation of the Uyghurs. The largest network of concentration camps since the Nazis and High Commissioner for Human Rights does nothing. The meeting where she sent armed police to my home, she couldn't even be bothered to attend. She didn't go.
So where to from here? Are you going to appeal this, or are you just going to keep on, or like accept that, or?
Yeah. Where to from here? Well, if all the UN understands is money, let's talk money. The US Congress has. What is interesting about my case is that last year, and the reason I was placed under investigation, is that the US Congress removed from US law a requirement that a certain percentage of the budget of UN organizations be withheld if they are treating whistleblowers badly. That has just been put back in the law. It is now 10%. There are public consultations. They have to reinstate any whistleblower who has been fired for the act of whistleblowing. Hi. They also have to withhold 10% of the money, and they have to push for actual reforms. It's no longer can be just a sort of thing where, oh, oops, we'll just, we'll up what we're going to give you by 10% and you'll still get the money anyway and it'll all be fine. We don't really expect you to do anything. It's not being done in that way anymore. So there is, I think, something of an appetite to do that. I intend to, one thing that, because I was charged with informing member states of the fact that names are being handed to China, that opened up an avenue to do freedom of information requests to those member states to find out what they did when I reported it to them. So I will certainly be very interested to learn when that information starts coming through. All the member states are claiming it will take a very long time, including my 2 member states of nationality, Ireland and the UK. I did ask them to please make sure the UN didn't fire me in between while I was waiting for their responses, but they obviously didn't do that. But I'm very curious to see exactly what the member states did. I'm curious to see why the member states aren't exercising due diligence in the use of their money, because this policy costs money, protecting this policy costs money. So I intend to take the member states that are paying for it to court. I already, one thing that happened after I saw you last time is that I went to court in the Netherlands. The Dutch foreign minister repeated in the Dutch parliament exactly what the UN says publicly about me. I sued him and I won. I represented myself in a language I don't speak through a translator who was wonderful, against a barrage of lawyers from the foreign ministry, and I won. This isn't a case where when the evidence is looked at, there's any doubt as to who is telling the truth. It's just that the UN is convinced it can keep it behind closed doors in its own court system, and I'm not playing that game anymore.
Wow. Thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention before I let you go? And I'm sure you've got a barrage of interviews that you've got. Well, I would imagine, because this is, as I mentioned, it's supposed to be hitting headlines, but yeah.
I mean, I was fired because I had a full page in Le Monde, which is the French paper of record. As I mentioned, I'm about to go on live British TV this evening as well. So, I mean, the awful part of it is, and something that I always try to avoid, it's much easier for press outlets to report on the story of the UN firing a whistleblower than it is to go through all the evidence of all of the names being handed over and report the sort of the actual issue. So I always knew that what it would take essentially to get to the point where the mainstream press would start covering this would be me being fired.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, that the UN didn't realize that is something of a surprise to me. But the main message I want to say basically is that people should not speak. The aim of this policy, China's purpose with this policy, is to stop people from speaking out. There are ways of still being able to speak out. If anyone is planning to go to the council or any other UN meeting and wants my advice, my Twitter messages are open. I will try to help you as much as I can. Obviously, the UN does not like me very much, and I no longer have a badge, so I can't get you in myself. But there are ways of trying to ensure that your name isn't passed over. And just, yeah, don't hesitate to get in touch. But please, please, please keep speaking out. The world needs to know what is happening. The UN and China should not be allowed to succeed in shutting down Uyghur voices at the UN.
What the Uyghur people really appreciate, and I'm sure all Chinese dissidents appreciate the work that you did as a human rights lawyer, and you're still a lawyer. And technically, they should reinstate you and just go get them. Like that's like. Yeah. Okay. Well, don't go away. I'm gonna just close out the show with a quick video, and then we can say our goodbyes after the show. So just don't go away. All right. Thank you for giving us your precious time, Emma. And I'd like to thank all the viewers watching. Make sure you guys share and get this news out there. The links to our first interview are in the description below. Emma's her social media and her response to her charges are also in the description below. So until next time, brothers and sisters, may peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Ümit üzme aziz halkım, ümit üzme ey ana yurt. Biz atlandık bu güreşke, o yıl taştek uyuşup. Allah verse bu nusretni, bizgilerimiz sep bulur.